Look at Hanbala, radiyallahu anhu, when he said in the hadith that we all know, he went to Abu Bakr and he said, Nafaqa Hanbala. He said, Hanbala became a hypocrite. And we know until the end where he said, when I'm with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and we hear him talking about Jannah and hellfire, it's as if we see it in front of us. And when we go home with our families, it is not that way. So he thought he was a hypocrite because of this, that Iman goes up and down. But the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam tells him, hour by hour, sa'atan sa'a. Nobody can maintain that kind of level. But the Sahaba, when they weren't maintaining that level, they were saying, am I a hypocrite? Did I leave Islam and am I just fooling myself? This is how we should treat ourselves. This is how we should treat ourselves so that we can change our ways and change our life immediately. Before another reminder comes, we should take this reminder and we should change our lives. Because this deen is not about remembering Allah in certain times. And this deen is not about making ibadah in certain times of the year or certain times of the week or anything like that. This deen is about istiqamah. How do we know this? Why else would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribe for us so many times each day to recite Surah Al-Fatiha, where we are asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. Grant us the straight path, or grant us the path of steadfastness. May Allah grant us steadfastness and make us from those who their hearts are affected by His remembrance. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله وبعد. So we know that we have to strive for this thing called Istiqamah, the steadfastness on the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How do we attain this? How do we attain this awareness and this understanding and this way of life where we avoid the prohibitions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we stay steadfast on His orders and we continue that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we sought to build during the month of Ramadan, and we should continue to seek to build afterwards. The first thing that any Muslim should do, anytime they want anything, anytime they want to achieve anything, they should ask the one who is able to give it to them. And no one is more generous and no one is more able to give than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we shouldn't ask Him for small things, we should ask Him for the greatest things. That's why we ask Allah, Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. We should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for hidayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كُلُّكُمْ ضَالٍ إِلَّا مَهْتَدَيْتُمْ. All of you are misguided. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, all of us are misguided, except for the ones whom I guide, except for the ones whom Allah guides. So, so ask me for guidance, and I will guide you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. If we want to be guided, we should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to give it to us. We shouldn't be afraid, oh, I did something wrong, so I can't ask Allah. This is the shaitan tricking you, because he knows that if you ask Allah, Allah will give you. You should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who created everything, the one who has the ability to give you steadfastness. We should say after every salah, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he told one of the companions, Allahumma inni uhibbuk. He told him, he taught him something, but he prefaced it by saying, by Allah, I love you. He has the love of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And what is the advice that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam gives him after this? He says, don't forget at the end of every salah to say, Allahumma a'inni ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. Oh Allah, help me to remember you and to be constant in your remembrance. Wa shukrik, and to be grateful to you in my actions and with my tongue. Wa husni ibadatik, and to worship you in the best way. We should be constantly asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this. And the reason why we don't ask truly is because we don't know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't comprehend the ability of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us what we ask. This is another major thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help us to attain istiqamah and steadfastness on the deen if we strive to achieve it. This is al-ma'rifatu billah. Ibn al-Mubarak, he says that the people of this dunya, many of us would fall under this category. The people of this dunya who work so hard only for this dunya and only to seek wealth and reward from this dunya, they leave the dunya without tasting the best of dunya. What is the best of dunya? That is al-ma'rifatu billah. That is knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and getting to know Him, getting to know His names and His attributes. The most merciful, whose mercy encompasses everything. The one who has wrath, but the one whose mercy overcomes His wrath. The one who is more merciful to his slaves than a mother who had just found her son who was lost. The one who His mercy encompasses everything in this dunya, and that is only one part of His mercy out of 99 that He separated His mercy into. And in the day of judgment, the rest of the 99 will be spread out to the believers. Do we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Have we gotten to know the one that we should be asking to guide us, and the one who His words are in the Quran telling us that in these words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, شِفَاءٌ لِمَا فِي الصُّدُورِ, it's a cure to what's in the hearts, in the chest, meaning the heart, these diseases of the heart that lead us to disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and lead us to returning to sin and to not establishing steadfastness and istiqamah. These diseases are alleviated by getting to know the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we said, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide you, and He will guide you. And then know about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Learn about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that you can be truly asking. The people who know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are seeking truly His mercy and His reward, and they are truly seeking refuge from His wrath and from the fire and from the punishment that He has prepared. They know really what it is, and these people, you will see them, they have stronger istiqamah than anyone else because they know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the third thing to attain istiqamah is to know the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us about the believers. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ إن في ذلك لذكرى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إن في ذلك لذكرى. In the Quran, لذكرى لمن كان له قلب. It's a reminder for the people who have hearts. Who isn't affected by the Quran? الذين قست قلوبهم فقست قلوبهم وكثير منهم فاسقون. Their hearts become hard. Their hearts become stone. They are heartless to the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This Quran is a reminder for those who have hearts. لمن كان له قلب أو ألقى السمع وهو شهيد. Have we become heartless? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the believers, الذين إذا ذكر الله وجلت قلوبهم وإذا تليت عليهم آياته زادتهم إيمانا. How many times have we heard this verse? The people who have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioned, or the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is brought before them, then they are affected by their heart. Their heart is affected by it. وَإِذَا تُلِيَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُهُ زَادَتْهُمْ إِيمَانًا. If His verses and His signs and His words are recited to them, they're increased in iman. They aren't sitting around looking at the clock. When is the khutbah going to end? When are we going to stop hearing the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? When are we going to stop being reminded? They don't come here to sleep. They are affected by the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah make me first among these, and may Allah make us all of the people who are among these who are affected by the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَنَزَّلْنَا مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا هُوَ شِفَاءٌ وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And we revealed and we brought down in this Quran what is a cure and mercy for the believers, a cure for the diseases of the heart. a cure for disobedience from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a cure from everything that will take us away from the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and a guidance towards that which will attain us the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and steadfastness on this deen. May Allah grant us steadfastness on this deen. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He didn't tell us these words for nothing. He told us these words and He taught us these words so that we can actually honor the Quran, so that we can value what's in it, this perfection, these literal words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He revealed, and this perfection, we should honor it. And indeed, if we want to attain steadfastness, we will gain from the Quran as much benefit and as much fadl as we honor the Quran. If we don't honor it, we can't benefit from it. But if we honor it, we can benefit greatly from it. And another thing we can do to attain Istiqamah is learning about the Prophet ﷺ, learning the stories of the Prophets, emulating the Sunnah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكُلًّا نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ الرُّسُلِ مَا نُثَبِّتُ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Prophet ﷺ that all these stories in the Quran that we are revealing to you, they are to give you steadfastness and give you strength and keep you strong and keep you from wavering. So how about us? They should keep us from wavering also. And how about the greatest of the prophets? We should learn from his seerah, and that should make us steadfast. Indeed, if we look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, calamities befell him. He went through difficulty. He went through hardship. He went through ease. We turn away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in situations like this. Oh, it's hard, so I can't come to the masjid. I can't make dhikr. I can't read Quran. There are so many opportunities, but we turn away from them. If we look at the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we will attain steadfastness because we know that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam went through worse, and we would emulate the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he said, "Rahim Allah Musa." May Allah have mercy on Musa. He went through so much worse than this. And he kept on delivering the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he didn't turn away.